we acknowledge the First Nations people of Canberra, the Ngunnawal people, their elders, past, present and future. We acknowledge His Royal Highness Crown Prince Tupoto'a Rukalala and the members of the Royal House of Tonga currently residing here in Canberra. The Tongan High Commissioner for Australia, Princess Latufuipeka Tukuaho, political leaders of this country of Australia, the leaders of our Pacific Islander communities here, and we welcome all of you here this Tuesday afternoon, the 19th of April 2022. Good afternoon and welcome to the Lo'au Multimedia program known as Storytelling. This program brings to you stories of people and from people from all over this wonderful world of ours. And we get to know a little of people's lives and learn a little also along the way. So today we're stopping and popping into the exciting world of poetry. We are going to look at two renowned poets, and hopefully you will already know a lot about these two poets. One being Elizabeth Barrett Browning and John Masefield. So anyway, in the studio with me this afternoon is Professor Siosiua Lafitani, who will be joining me in the discourse about these poets and their poetry. Thank you.
Thank you, Luseane, for that marvelous introduction, and I look forward for a discussion on these two poets, John Masefield and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I guess we've got John Masefield there, but also if you can, there's Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I will be talking about her first. Not because she's a woman, but I'll just be talking about her first. She's an amazing human being, this Elizabeth Barrett Browning,
Course, yeah.
From the Victorian era when things were a little bit unequitable, Siwa, you know. Women had a place in society, absolutely not the same place that men were in society. So a lot of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry that she had written, talks about that. Anyway, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, or Elizabeth Barrett Moulton Browning, she was born on the 6th of March 1806, and then she passed on to the next world on the 29th of June 1861, which meant that she was only 55 years old. So even though she hadn't been here in this life for a long amount of time, but the amount of work and the amount of poetry she composed was absolutely outstanding, astounding also. Elizabeth was born in country Durham. She was the eldest of 12 children. Nowadays, a lot of children could be 4 children or 6 children. Then 12 children was sort of common. Lots of people had lots of children in those days. I guess maybe they had more, I don't know, but they had a lot of children in those days. Anyway, at 15, Elizabeth became quite ill. And when I say became quite ill, she from a I guess, sort of healthy child growing up, and then all of a sudden she's laid in bed or only on her chair, which is where she wrote from. And she had intense pain in her head, so she suffered a lot of headaches, and she had a lot of spinal pain too. And this stayed with her until the end of her life. So that's a long time to be in pain.
Long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed, yeah.
They say that the painkiller that she used was a painkiller that was used a lot in that time, which was called laudanum. And this is a medicine that they mixed up with alcohol, morphine, opium, and you can imagine this would have been a really strong painkiller. So she took this nearly every day for the pain, which is, they think that, which is why she also expired early. She died early was because apparently laudanum, when it's taken a lot, it can do a lot of damage to your body, to the insides of your body. So even though she had to take this painkiller, but at the same time it also killed her too. This young woman, we're going to look at one of her poems, and it's my favourite poem ever, this poem of hers. So this poem of hers was written for her husband, beloved husband, Robert Browning, who was also a poet. And a little bit about Robert Browning. When Robert Browning met Elizabeth at a function, she fell in love with him. So she wrote him a lot of letters, mostly love letters. This is how they conducted their relationship. She just kept writing to him because she fell in love with him. Her father did not agree to this partnering, so her father did a lot to try and stop them from having a relationship.
That's very hard.
Yeah, but her father couldn't stop them. See, love conquers all, they say.
Of course.
So even though he didn't want Elizabeth to be married to this very poor poet named Robert Browning, he decided...
Poor Robert.
Well, not poor Robert, because he ended up marrying her. But so what we know about this relationship was that it was a very... it was a love relationship, and nothing stopped them. So she wrote this poem for her husband, and it is amongst a group of poems or sonnet called the Portuguese. And amongst these sonnets in the Portuguese, sonnet number 43 is the poem that I'm going to talk to you about today. And it is called How Do I Love Thee? And I know a lot of you people out there know absolutely about this poem, and maybe you studied it at school or English literature. I don't know, but a lot of people know this poem. So maybe without further ado, Siwa, I will read this poem.
Beautiful. How do I love thee?
How do I love thee? From the Portuguese, sonnet number 43. So, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight. For the ends of being an ideal grace, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God chose, I shall but love thee better after death. Did that poem move you, Siwa, or not at all? Anyway, we won't wait.
Certainly, of course.
What we'll do
I
is...
feel it, Lucy.
Okay.
Yeah,
what we'll do is that I'd like to talk about this poem because it talks like poetry does, or what stories do. It talks absolutely about how she felt about her husband, and it tells you, because she wants to count the ways of how much she loves her husband. She wants to tell us absolutely how she loves her husband, how much she loves her husband, whether it's going to end or whether it's just going to continue her love for her husband. So, starting off with, I guess with even the first lines, because she says, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. She's telling us of her love, and that she's going to tell us now of how many ways
to tell
that she loves him. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So she starts off by counting her ways, and she starts off with, I love thee to the depth and breadth and height
Oh,
my soul can reach. So she's saying, as far, as high, as wide, as deep,
all the dimensions.
all the dimensions that her soul can reach is how much she loves Robert, you know. Not just, oh, I love you so much. No,
No,
not enough
that's
for,
not, yeah,
not enough for
sufficient,
Elizabeth.
yeah.
She's counting to us and she's telling us all the ways that she loves Robert. Depth, breadth, and height. You know, nowhere else to go after that. That her soul can absolutely reach.
All of the above.
When feeling out of sight, you know, she's saying even the things she can't see, she still loves him. Absolutely. For the ends of being an ideal grace. She's saying until the end of being an ideal grace. End. To the end of being, you know. Is there ever an end? And we know there's no end to being. Is there? It's a bit philosophical there. To the ends of being an ideal grace. There's no end. We don't reach the end, yeah, you know, of being, do we? I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need. Every day, to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. Every day, not just today or tomorrow or maybe next week, every day, to the level of every day's most quiet need. It's just amazing, this woman, the way she pens her words and the way she talks about all the things that she's talking about, her love for Robert. And she talks about candlelight because she sits by candlelight. So the sun is the day, candlelight is in the evening. So she's saying every day, in the evening, during the day, she's thinking about him and she's loving him. I love thee freely as men strive for right. That there in itself, I love thee freely as men strive for right. You know, men who strive for right, if we're, you know, people that, you know, battle for rights of people and whatever, nothing stops us. Nothing stops us at all. Nothing. So that's a passion. She's talking about a passion there. When men strive for right, it's a passion. You know, unstoppable. They do it until they
give
die.
everything. Yeah.
Everything. You're all. Even
including
if you die.
their life. Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, fight for rights, you die for rights, you die for what you believe in, you know.
Indeed, yeah.
I love thee purely as they turn from praise. You know, when you fight for right, you're not fighting for something for someone to say, oh, Siwa, you've done a great job there. No? That's not why you fight for right. You fight for right because you've got a pure need to do it because you think it's right.
You've got the passion, eh?
It's a passion.
Yeah,
you're not doing it because your next door neighbour said, you better go and march around Parliament House to tell them that they need to do this. No.
Interesting how she equates that to fighting for right.
Absolutely, because she's trying to bring in...
Her love, you know, for the...
Yes, yes. She's trying to give us examples of passion, which will be fighting for rights. That's examples of passion, you know. And, you know, that love doesn't want to be told or thanked or said, oh gosh, thank you, Elizabeth, for loving me. No, she's not looking for that. She doesn't want any payment or any reward in kind for what she's doing or her feelings for Robert. She's just telling us purely, I love him and it doesn't matter what happens.
Unconditional.
Unconditionally.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith.
Oh.
She loves with a passion, absolute passion, of all the things that made her sad in the past. And as a child, when you're a child, you're pure. So she's talking about purity of love when she says childhood's faith.
Go from old griefs to childhood's faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah.
Because we equate talking about children and purity. So, and children believing and having faith in something. When their parents tell them something, they believe,
trust,
they have faith.
Yeah, with
Pure
full
faith.
trust, yeah.
Children fully trust us as adults. So she's saying that her love also is like that. It just trusts. Whatever is told or whatever is there, doesn't matter. She trusts that her love for Robert is pure, you know, and is incredible to everything that's happened to her in her life. All the passion, all the sadness, everything like that, she's brought into this poem for Robert, this man that she absolutely loved with her life. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my old saints. She talks about, because she was very religious, and I think, you know, when we talk about this poem, I'm talking about my take on it. This is not for you to say, oh no, I'm just talking about my take on this poem.
Your take. I have my take too.
Yes. Well, that's, you know, and we talk about how this poem feels and what we think this poem is telling us. I just think that this poem is undeniable love, you know, pure love, passionate love, you know, love of that she cannot even fathom, she cannot even measure. She doesn't want to measure it. She's saying it's immeasurable, this love.
Yes.
So she talks about her old saints in the Bible, you know, that she knows of. So she loves because she loves her religion, her belief of old saints. So she loves she ends her poem with, I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God chooses, I shall but love thee better after death. Her love doesn't stop. You know, I think about the Tongan love songs. You know, they pen the words, and it's beautiful, our Tongan love songs. But it usually says, "Te ofea koe au ke kumate." I love you until I die. Eh?
Death is
the ending, is the finish point. You know,
love, yeah.
finish point. Elizabeth, her finishing point is not death. Her finishing point, or if there is, there isn't.
Beyond.
She's saying there's no finishing point. It will continue, and she says again, I will love him better even after I die. She talks about love not ending.
It's getting better.
It's
after death. Yeah.
Yes, as she's saying, I love thee better after death. So she's saying, my love only grows, it doesn't decrease. And love doesn't, you know, come to the end of life and that's, thank you, love, you're gone now. No, she's saying, I'm here now at the end of my life and my love continues and it's just going to be better. And it was going to grow more.
It grows.
And that's her belief, and that's how much she loved her husband, is that there's no end to my love. There is never going to end. It's just going to keep going, and it's just going to get bigger and better and whatever. You know, this is absolutely Elizabeth Barrett Brown's.
Death is like the beginning of another growth, of another stage of
beginning or continuing,
expansion,
or a continuing, as she says. It's a continuing. You know, she continues her love. It just doesn't stop. It grows. It gets bigger. It covers the whole world of what she could possibly cover. It covers her history, passion from her history and her story. It covers the future. And her future is, she talks about here, is the continuing of love after the end of her life on this earth.
Elizabeth
Barrett Browning. And when we when we think about Elizabeth Siwa, so Elizabeth Moulton Barrett Browning, born in 1806 and died in 1861, she was just an amazing human who had, as you said, she has done this thing and thought carefully about her love, lived her love for her husband daily, second by second, minute by minute. That's what she means. Her love never stopped. It just stayed with her all the time and continued in her life. And I think her love for Robert was the one thing that kept her, gave her some peace, even through her life of pain, and life of illness.
Was the real medicine for
yes,
her.
And life of disability, because she had a disability. She couldn't walk around. She had to sit. Now, when she met Robert Browning, and of course, as I said before, her father wasn't happy with this meeting, and her father did not want her to have a relationship with him. They ran away and got married. That's how they did it. They just eloped and got married.
That's the power of their love.
Absolutely. And I think, not only Elizabeth, but people have said the power of love, will enable anything that you put your mind to.
Nothing is impossible.
Nothing is impossible.
For the power of love.
Yeah, power of love. Now, at the time, when you talk about poet laureate Siwa, this is given to poets, and it's an esteemed gift or reward given to poets in any of the big countries like, England, where it started, in the 17th century. The king decided to give out these awards to certain poets. Yeah. But with that award, those poets were then supposed to compose poems for special things that happened in the country. That was their job. So you can be a poet laureate until you die, or you can be a poet laureate until the king decides, Siwa's writing really great poems, so I'll make him poet laureate now.
So he met he picked.
Yes, the king or the head of state or country picked the poet laureate of the country. Now, she would have been a poet laureate, but because she was female, she didn't get nominated.
That was the
Yes. And at the time, Tennyson, she and Tennyson were sort of, the rivals to see who would be poet laureate. And this was when Wordsworth died, and we must go to Wordsworth one day. So when William Wordsworth passed on, he was the poet laureate at the time. Then Tennyson and Elizabeth were sort of the two people that they were looking at. But because she was a woman, and I absolutely believe that this is true, they decided to give it to Tennyson. Not that he was not as good. He's an amazing poet and writer, but Elizabeth, with all her work, absolutely was a good candidate for being a poet laureate.
Yeah, after there was a chance,
There was a big chance.
Big chance, yeah.
Big chance.
But it's a reflection of the mood
time.
of the time.
Absolutely.
Because the predominance of men in all aspects. Yeah.
In all aspects. All aspects. Law, community, politics, whatever forum, men were the
up, down,
leaders.
Or in the social hierarchy, ladder, left and right.
Thank goodness that women have a little bit of a say now.
In Tonga, there were a lot of powerful women in their social rank, but not in Britain at the time.
Yes. I think we were, Tonga was way in front, with women's rights.
Of Europe.
With the Fahu system.
Europe,
Absolutely.
Fahu system, that's right.
Yeah. But anyway, during this time, so with all her writing, Robert Browning, who was a poet, of course, was attracted to this woman because of her poetry. And we know that, sometimes there's an attraction to people because of their work, not because of who they are, what they look like, or, it's usually there's an attraction to what someone has achieved or what someone has done. Robert was absolutely attracted to Elizabeth because of her beautiful poetry and writing. So they decided to get married, and she was disinherited by her father. Now, Elizabeth, I don't think, cared much about how her father felt. Already there were not agreeing over a lot of things, especially the politics of the day, because Elizabeth's father was a slave trader, and Elizabeth did not agree to this. And some of her poems write about the rights of women and how women were treated badly, so...
Interesting, yeah.
Yes. So, to talk about poetry and poets, they write about what's happening at the time, to them personally, to the country they're in, to the community they're in, to the family they're in. And so this is her telling a story in this beautiful poem about her love for her husband, but in her other poetry and in her other writings is about how the world is in Great Britain on the day. They actually, yes, sorry, Siwa.
Yeah, she had this sense of human right to say, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There we go, human rights. And I think, she was the feminist of the time, even though feminism didn't quite look at her until very late at her stuff. I guess they only looked at her as someone who was so in love with a man.
More
that's
to
all
that
her,
side,
That's all her time was spent on talking about a man. But if you look carefully at her poetry and her poems, she writes about all sorts of issues of the day, Now, Elizabeth and Robert had a son. They actually moved to Italy and lived there, so they had a son. She had this boy quite late in life. She was 43 when she had Robert, because they named him Robert, to his father. But she didn't have Robert until she was 43, so that is quite an amazing feat for her to accomplish, seeing that she was disabled.
She was
very sick. And she was 43. That's sort of nearly unknown at the time, because women died giving birth all the time in the world.
And it was the first, her first child.
First and only.
But normally women, they give birth 20s, 30s, to give birth to a few children, a few.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
in their 20s and 30s, but to give birth in her 40 and also the first, wasn't a very easy.
No, at
thing,
the time. At the time, people were dying.
Yeah.
Just normal young women were dying giving birth. But she, with her spinal problem,
illness,
yes, with her illness, with her disability, she was able to give birth to this child.
She was a very strong woman, Luseane, in that.
And I guess we can say that love got her through. She wanted to have a child with Robert. And she named her child. They named their child Robert.
It shows the depth of her love.
Yes, absolutely.
That she talks about in the poem.
Yes, she. I think also too with Elizabeth. She was a daughter of a very she came from a wealthy family. Because her father was a slave trader. And they had a lot of land in Jamaica, and I guess that's where a lot of the slaves that he bought worked, on their land in Jamaica. And, but she never forgot the fact that he was that. And she always argued with her father about how she disagreed with his mode of business. But that, that sort of didn't stop him from doing what he was doing. But as I said, this young woman of the time, when women were known to, stand up against their parents or stand up against anyone. She said to her father, I don't like what you're doing, She also said to her father, I'm going to marry this man. She took herself off with her husband and lived in Italy, where she had her baby, and which is where she also died. So she obviously loved Italy, and you know, she did a lot of her writing in Italy. So that, I guess this is a little short, story about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Those of you who are studying literature and poetry and whatever, you can go and have a look at Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I think you'll be nicely surprised at the amount of work, because they say that Elizabeth, the poems that she wrote as a child, it's the biggest collection on earth of poetry written by children. Biggest. That in itself is an amazing feat.
Phenomenal.
Yes.
Yeah.
As a child, from the age of 8, to I guess the age of 12, she was writing, books and books of poetry.
Yeah, that some of our teachers used her writings in that early age for our children.
Yes, because
I'm talking about Tonga.
Yes. And sometimes most of the poets that we talk about are male, and and of course, and they're amazing poets. But when I was at school, we didn't talk about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I was just interested in her, and I read her poems, and I loved her poems. But I noticed when, with English literature, we did not at the time do a lot of stuff around female poets. We talked about Tennyson, we talked about Wordsworth, all those well-known male poets, but not really female poets. So
very
and
rare and unusual at the time.
yes, unusual.
Unusual topic.
Yes, and I think finally, as I said before about the women's movement, only took notice of her not very long ago, because someone obviously sat down and read her poetry and thought, oh, she's not just raving on about a man here.
That was very late for them to find out.
Yeah. She's actually talking about women's rights and how she saw things, and happenings of the day. So with that in mind, have a read, have a look at Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I hope you enjoy a lot of her poems, because this is only a teeny weeny bit of the work that she has done.
And I think when we talk about love in her case, Lucy, in poetry, when we talk about love, we should always go and read her work. Yeah? Yes. I'm aware of the fact that there are a lot of poetry, poetical works on love, but her work is so unique.
Her work is so unique.
If we go and read and try to examine and go in depth to the underlying basis of her view and her insight of love.
Yes.
Love for her is it's an amazing phenomenon. Yeah? The way she was trying to express it with strong faith, strong trust within herself and between herself and Robert, the husband. And there were some outcomes of that love, especially in the birth of their son Robert. That's one highlight of the hallmark of their love and her view of love. And when I think of her, Lucy, She was sick. She had these few illnesses, and she was like outcasted by the father because he didn't want her to marry Robert, and she was away, in a different space, different world. But nothing stopped her from expressing and deliberately sharing her love with Robert and also the world. Love. Nothing can stop love. Let's put it that way. The power of love in any circumstance. But in this particular situation, it's about a love of a woman to a man. Doesn't matter what happens, the love will still
Love conquers all, I guess we can say.
move.
There was one little interesting bit that I thought about Siwa when I was looking into Elizabeth Barrett Brown. Her name is Elizabeth Moulton Barrett, and her father is, a Moulton. And we know about the Moulton. We know about Egan Moulton, Reverend Egan Moulton, that we know a lot about. And I wondered...
It's from the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
The same,
Because that's
there's
how
a family connection there.
Same line, or
Yes.
same clan.
Yes, so it comes from the male line of Elizabeth, the Moultons. And also too, I'm not surprised at when we look at Egan Moulton and his poetry and his writing and his compositions, and I guess down this family comes this DNA of writing,
course,
and
He was a musician and a composer as well.
Absolutely,
a
absolutely.
Poet, and it runs through blood, as they say.
Yes, comes through the family.
Yeah.
So that was a little interesting bit that I
Thank you
wondered.
for bringing that in.
And hopefully I'll find more things later on if we go back to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But because of time, I think we must pop into Mr. John Masefield.
Okay, we go, and I'll bring back John Masefield. Where are you?
There's the lovely Elizabeth.
Here.
Still
John
there.
comes up.
There's John
Here's the man.
Masefield.
Yeah, here's the man.
John Masefield, I felt truly interesting. I mean, they all are. All these people are interesting and have accomplished amazing things in their lives. And John Masefield, initially, as Elizabeth Barrett Browning was self-taught. She was very well read. She could speak 4 or 5 languages, and she could read. She could read Greek, she could read Hebrew, and she taught herself. Because as we know, young women of the time didn't go to university. Now John Masefield is the same in a way, because he wasn't a student from Cambridge or Oxford or any of those renowned universities that we know of. He was in a way self-taught. Now John Masefield, what interested me was that Futa had interpreted one of his poems into Tongan. So Siwa has got that prepared and ready to read to you.
And Futa had some knowledge of him.
Absolutely, he would have.
Apart from interested, he was interested in his poems, his work, but Futa knew John,
Yes.
to some extent.
Yes. So obviously with Futa, knowing Futa, he would have looked at every little thing to do with John Masefield.
Yeah.
He would have read every word written about John Masefield. So he was a novelist, John Masefield. He was a dramatist, a journalist, and his literary career was rich and varied. And he is recognized all over the world for lots and lots of things, with ballads and poetry about nature and mythical narrative, So this man, not only did he just write some poetry, but he wrote all different types of poetry, telling all different types of stories about the day, about mythological stories, about drama. So, and then a journalist. But this young man grew up, a normal young man. He went to school. He was born in 1878 and he died in 1967. He was also made the English Poet Laureate from 1930 to 1967. Now that's quite a long time. So from 1930 until he passed away, he was Poet Laureate of England, of Great Britain. He was born in Ledbury, Herefordshire, and he was he went to school. So he actually went to school, then went on to high school. Now we don't know what else he accomplished, but we know that he was a self-taught, and he learned by reading, Then after high school, he got on a boat, got on a ship. HMS Conway was the first ship that, John Masefield got on.
Yeah.
So he got on to train to be a sea person, to work as a sailor. And also, I guess because he says that he was addicted to reading. Now, I reckon that's the best addiction to have.
It's so good to hear that.
Yes.
Someone
Had an addiction to reading.
That's the best addiction, I think, that we should all have. Yeah.
That sort of addiction won't kill you. It'll only inform you, So it only make your mind bigger.
Enlightens you.
Yes.
Yes. I like that. I think we should do some project on that kind of addiction.
Yes, I think so. I sort of felt like I had a bit of an addiction to reading when I was a teenager, because I read everywhere I could.
I'm addicted, but the problem is I'm addicted to the computer and read from there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what your form of reading where it's from. But anyway,
instead of reading the books, I
yes.
still read books,
Yes.
but mostly on the computer.
Let's go back to John Masefield. So he also went on another ship in 1894, and this ship was called the Gill Crew, and this ship went off to Chile. And on this trip, he experienced the worst sea voyage ever that a crew member of a ship would experience.
A young and new, yeah.
Yes, it was very, very rough. And he saw things like, huge fish, flying fish. He saw, big storms and things like that. So this was John Masefield.
An experience,
yes, this is a sailor. I mean, it was good that he experienced that, because sailors experience everything about travelling on ship.
Yeah.
So travelling on the ship is never smooth sailing, never. You
But
always
for
come
the
across.
first time.
Yes, you always come across storms and things like that. Anyway, he returned to sea. When was it? After that, he went on a few ships. So he went on another ship, and he ended up in New York. And in New York, he wanted to become a writer, So he thought this was a good place to become a writer. But he was very poor, and he decided to get a job. So he got a job in a carpet factory, and with every little bit of money he earned, he bought books. And he also had to have another job so that he could buy food for himself, and that was working in a bar. So he helped in the bar so that he could feed himself, and with his job at the carpet factory, he bought all the classics that you could ever think about. And they say, or he says, that he read about 20 books each week or month. Each week he bought 20 books with his money. So that, when you think about that at the time, when your wages aren't that much and you work long hours, to buy 20 books,
what a life, yeah.
means that's all your money. All your money goes into buying books. And with these books, that's how he educated himself, Siwa. Just by reading all these classics.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes. So books by Dickens, Kipling, by Keats, poetry by Keats, Du Maurier. He bought all these books and he read them, and that's how, in a way, he educated himself.
He learned and educated himself by reading.
But there's another little there's another little bit to this self-education, Siwa, because 23 years old Masefield in New York meets his future wife, Constance Cromlin, and she was 35. She was 12 years older than he was, and she was educated in the classics and English literature, and she was also a maths teacher. So he was very cluey. So he was attracted to her because of all this. So I reckon his education,
her profession.
Yes, his education continued.
Why not? Yeah.
With Constance Cromlin, and because she was into literature, English literature, and she was also a maths teacher, she was able to teach young John Masefield, who was 12 years younger than she was, and I guess.
Let's put it this way: he was one of his students.
That's right. And why not? If you're going to be taught, it doesn't matter who you're taught by.
You look for teachers. You look for
absolutely
to learn from someone else.
Yes, and we always remember our favourite and our best teachers. She just happened to be Constance. Just happened to be his favourite teacher, and she taught him a lot. And even though he wasn't a scholar, as we say, he didn't have his bachelor's, his master's, or his doctorate. He wasn't educated in either Harvard or Oxford.
But
or
he was
Cambridge.
still a thinker in the context of poetry.
Yeah, and as I was going to say, even though he didn't go to university, he still taught himself all these things that you learn in university anyway. That's right. By reading and by being taught by his wife. Yeah. Even though they don't talk a lot about his wife teaching him, but I'm telling you, his wife taught him. Men don't usually talk about their wives helping, but I'm telling you, this woman helped him through because of what she knew.
You teach me, Lucy.
I do, and I won't stop. But going back to John Masefield, it was later on, Siwa, that a lot of universities gave him, rewarded him or awarded him with various degrees. Not because he studied with them, but, as a reward for his work.
Yeah, for the deeds.
For all the deeds. So I'm waiting for Lo'au to award me with all the deeds of all the work I've done.
Certainly,
so I'll just put that little thing in while we're here.
Soon. Not far from now. Yeah.
Anyway, Siwa, the poem that we're going to be looking at with John Masefield is Sea Fever. And Sea Fever, Futa had interpreted. But let me read you Sea Fever, and then we'll go to Professor Futahelu's interpretation of Sea Fever to the Tongan language. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind song and the white sails shaking, and a grey mist on the sea's face, and a grey dawn breaking. I must down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I must down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gulf's way and the whale's way, where the wind's like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over. Seafield.
Bravo, bravo,
John
bravo.
Masefield.
Bravo, John Masefield.
And here we have the Tongan version.
The Tongan version translated by Professor Futahelu. Title, Awangatahi.
Awangatahi.
The Tongan translation of Sea Fever.
Apt.
Te toi whoki pe au ki tahi. Ki e tahi ringoringoa pe a molangi. Ka koe ku kore pe a ku koha waka kafa. Moha whetu u ke u kawe ngai. Kawe ngaki. Pe a fute fohe, pe a kofea matangi, pe a kālua ke mahaela. Koe ui ai pe au tā whatawhaki. Koe ui matui pe a koe ui mahino. Hei kai aonga ha whaka ikai. Ka koe ku kore pe. Koa fo i aho hako. Pe a punakake ngahi aho. Pe a tanunu e pe au. Pe a au fuka na wā. Kai ngala e tala moingongo. Aia koe fo i whakatonga. Ai koe ki konga pe. It was part of the Sea Fever by John Masefield, translated by Professor Futahelu
And you know, Siwa, some translation you always lose something during translation. But when I listen to Futa's translation of this, there's not much loss in it. It just really, tells you the story of what John Masefield is trying to talk about here, the way he misses the sea.
Yeah, that's the best translation is the one that who misses little of the meaning of any translation.
Yes, because with translation we have to carry the emotion.
Yeah, and Fuda was the best last century in translation, and I haven't come across someone like him in apart from other things, Lucy, in terms of translation.
Yes,
and with this, if you read just the first line, Lucy, and I'll read the first line here,
yes,
or a few lines for us to see and listen again how Fuda translated this poem.
I must go down to the sea again. I'm not sure that I'll just get up the...
That's the one.
Yes, that's the one, because I put up two before...
No, the one you just read, that's the one that Fuda translated.
Yeah. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky.
Te utoe whoki pe au ki tahi, ki he tahi, ringoringoa pe a molangi.
And all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by.
Ka koe ku kore pe aku, ko hawaka kafa, moha whetu u kawenga aki.
And the wheels kick, and the wind song, and the white sails shaking.
Pea fute e fohe, pea kofe matangi, pea kālua ke mahaela.
And a
I
grey
miss
mist,
Futa.
and a grey mist on the sea's face, and a grey dawn breaking.
Koe ui ai pe au tā whatawhake. I'm not sure whether it's the same one, maybe.
Yes, it is.
It is. Koe ui ai pe au tā whatawhake. Koe ui matui pe koe ui mahino.
Is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. I think you've just said
Yeah.
that. Yes.
Koe ui ai pe au tā whatawhake. Koe ui matui pe koe ui mahino. He ikai.
And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds.
Ka koe ku kore pe, ko hawhoi aho hako, pe a puna kaki e ngahi aho.
in the flung spray, in the blown spume, and the seagulls crying.
Pea tanuno e pea au fuka e naua, kai ngala e tala mo ngongo. Oh.
So that's the end of that
Futa
translation.
is here with us. Professor Futa Hello, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
The spirit's here. But that's what I mean. So I think to translate something you have to be, you have to be able to have a good grasp of both languages so that you can get the right sense and the right emotion.
Yeah,
Because,
of poetry, you
yes.
have to have a sense of poetry, of culture, of history to translate something. You can't just walk in and say, I'm a translator, because it will reflect in the outcome of the translation, your understanding of things, of reality. Yeah?
And as we talked before, as I said before, that poets talked about, the climate of the time, the political climate, what was happening in the countries at the time politically, what was happening in communities, what was happening in their families. So to be able to translate well, I think you've got to know the history of the place you are translating. Say if it's a poem about England, you've got to know about England. If it's a poem about the sea, you've got to know about ships and the way waves are and the way tide is.
Yeah, it's about knowledge, in-depth knowledge, Lucy. And that's why Futa was so clear and so particular in translation, because of his body of knowledge. Yeah? And I haven't come across a translator like him. Every time I'm translating or work on a translation, I always think of how he translated, and I learned particular things from him in translation. And I haven't come across a scholar, a Tongan scholar, with that essence, with that skill of translation like Futa. I have seen some in the early stage of the missionaries when they came to Tonga, like Shirley Baker and her wife. I think it's Patricia. They were good translators. When I look at some of the, John, Mr. John Thomas. There were a few there. But Rutherford, but Futa last century in just talking about Tongan scholars in last centuries,
Because he...
Futa Ebeli,
yes.
one of them,
Absolutely.
Professor Ebeli Aofa.
And we talk about Futa because of his... Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, talking about Futa, because of his knowledge about English literature.
That's right, and poetry,
And poetry. Anyway, he already had that knowledge. Tongan language, English language, which he was very proficient on.
And English,
Yes, and when you have someone like that, and also had a real sense of and a knowledge of what the poet was talking about.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what John Masefield was talking about.
Yeah.
So he interpreted not just word for word, but the emotion of the poet.
And the meanings,
in
behind
that.
Those emotions.
You can't interpret anything, a book, a poet, a poem or whatever, just word for word. You've got to get into what the poet or the writer was talking about and what she was thinking or he was thinking at the time, what emotions they had, what governed those emotions.
Yes.
That is, a true interpreting is like that. So that when you're reading, say, the English version, and then when you're reading the Tongan version, it gives you the same feeling, of accomplishment anyway of the interpreter. So this here, I think I love the poem in English and I absolutely love the poem in Tongan. I think our time is up, Siwa. with these two amazing poets,
Of course,
Elizabeth Barrett
course.
Browning,
we go back to
John
them.
Masefield.
Yeah.
You know, John Masefield was a poet laureate until he died in the 1930s. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning should have been, but she wasn't because of the time. But it didn't stop her from writing these amazing poems. So anyway, if you're looking at Elizabeth, go in and look at her Portuguese. Portuguese is a nickname that her husband gave her, the little Portuguese. So she's written a whole heap of, she composed the Portuguese, and the sonnet that I read to you was sonnet number 44. So go in if you've got time, have a look at the Portuguese, or have a look at all her work. You'll enjoy yourself. And then also have a look at John Masefield, because I think you can read something, but at the same time, all of a sudden you know a little bit about that person. You think, oh, that's maybe why he wrote that. So I have enjoyed today, and I hope you have too.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for this program and your preparation and what you have delivered to our audience out there, and whoever in the future will come and watch this program. Malo abita Luseane, malo momea mai. Goodbye and talk to
Thank you.
later.
Thank
you.
Stay
Malo,
safe.
stay safe.
Yes.
Yeah. We have another final look at these two poets. This is
another thing I forgot, Siwa, and I think that'll be a nice little bit to add into our conversation, especially with the John Masefield poem.
Yes.
That interpretation that Futa did, Awangatahi, has been put to music by the Fofoanga. So maybe in the next few weeks we will play to you that Awangatahi by the Fofoanga boys.
Teo toe whoki pe au ki tahai.
Teo toe whoki pe au.
Teo toe whoki pe au ki tahai.
See, I thought you weren't going to sing. We'll wait for the Fofoanga.
Malo.
Mahalo o Whalaia.
Whalaia.